Welcome back. Voting amid the coronavirus pandemic. Twitter putting a warning label on one of President Trump's tweets for the first time ever yesterday after the president tweeted about potential risks of mail-in voting, telling users to, quote, get the facts. The president fighting back, accusing Twitter of election interference and stifling free speech. Now, earlier this month, when I sat down with President Trump at the White House, I asked him about the risks of voting by mail.
There's another kind of interference, and that could be fooling around with voting machines. I mean, in terms of voting by mail, vote proxies, what's your take?
Voting by mail is very dangerous because people can grab them. People can take that proxy, sign a name. They can do all sorts of things, especially harvesting. They go out and they say, just, let's put them all together. And that's happened.
Interesting that this is now front and center. Dagan McDowell, your take.
Well, Twitter did warn President Trump's team going back to, I think it was on May the 20th, about putting misleading statements out. The issue was that he tweeted that Michigan had sent absentee ballots ahead of the primaries, absentee ballots to people. Michigan had sent applications for absentee ballots, and President Trump then deleted the tweet. However, if Twitter's going to fact check the president, maybe you ought to get the fact check right, because initially Twitter, in part of its fact checking, it's relying on news organizations with a questionable history of getting, history right, particularly with the Russia collusion fable that was told the American people. I digress. But in part of the fact check, Twitter was saying that mail-in ballots are already used in some states, including Oregon, Utah, and Nebraska. But that statement appears to conflate automatic all-mail voting with absentee ballots in regard to Nebraska. Nebraska did send mailed applications to every voter in response to the pandemic, but the state didn't automatically send ballots. This is in the Wall Street Journal today. And in the fact check that Twitter also put out, it said fact checkers say there is no evidence that mail-in ballots are leaked to voter fraud. Well, here's a quote for you. Absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud, unquote. That is from a bipartisan commission in 2005 led by the former president of the United States, Jimmy Carter, and the former Secretary of State, James Baker. People can go and read this report, but it goes into people basically putting pressure on citizens at home and nursing homes, in the workplace, intimidation and vote buying. And in fact, in the 97 Miami mayoral election, there were 36 arrests for absentee ballot fraud. So I don't know what Twitter is talking about. If they're going to fact check people, fair enough, then they ought to hire their own team of people to do it, rather than leaning on people who have a questionable history of reporting actual facts.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And they named the Washington Post and the New York Times, the two publications that completely got it wrong in terms of the Russia probe in the last 3 years. Mattie Duppler, your reaction to this, because it's not just what happened with Twitter, but also remember what happened to Palmer Luckey with YouTube. These social media organizations are immediately just jumping to, away from anybody who thinks that they think are agreeing with President Trump.
Right. And Maria, this comes after last November when Twitter announced that it would be banning candidate ads from its platform in order to encourage more free expression. Well, if you're doing that, then creating your own labels on some tweets while leaving others out there which may contain malicious or false information, then you're de facto allowing candidates to use the platform differently and giving candidates a different edge. So, I just don't understand what Twitter thinks it's getting away with here. This comes at the same time where tech is trying to say, no, we're not publishers. We should be able to operate freely because we're just the platform by which other people publish information, which I do think is the correct approach. But they certainly make it more difficult for regulators who are looking at actions like this from Twitter to allow them to continue to function that way.